On the night of the 4th of October 2025, at 11:46 p.m., during her own wedding reception on the lawn of the Adeyemi Bright Estate on Banana Island, two police officers walked through a crowd of 300 guests and placed handcuffs on Chidinma Nwosu's wrists before she had finished cutting the cake. The band did not stop playing immediately. A waiter carrying a tray of chilled zobo froze mid-step 4 feet from the cake table and did not move again until an officer told him to. Chidinma did not scream. She set the cake knife down on the white tablecloth, blade first, the way her mother had taught her to set down any knife, and held both wrists out so the cuffs would close without tearing the lace at her sleeves. She did not know, as the metal closed around her wrists in front of 300 guests, that the diamond necklace zipped into the evidence bag the officers carried belonged, 11 years earlier, to her own father. Chidinma Adeze Nwosu was 26 years old that October and weighed 51 kilograms, 4 less than the year before, because for 14 months she had been sending 30,000 naira of her 35,000 naira monthly salary home to Newi to cover her mother's dialysis, and making up the difference by skipping lunch on the days the Adeyemi Bright kitchen staff did not have leftovers to share. She had a full name that appeared on exactly one document at the estate, her employment contract, filed under domestic staff, until the morning Tobena Adeyemi Bright introduced her to his cousins at a birthday lunch, not as the maid, but as Chidinma, and watched 3 faces try to recalculate what that meant. She owned, besides 2 changes of uniform and the wedding dress she had altered herself from a second-hand satin gown, bought for 6,000 naira at a Yaba thrift market, one object that had survived every move of her life since she was 15. A green hardcover notebook with a spine she had restitched twice with fishing line. Embossed in faded gold along the inside cover with the words Engineer E. Nwosu, 1996. It had belonged to her father, who had died when she was 15, and it contained, in his small, precise handwriting, 11 years of formulas for a cassava fermentation process he had developed in a workshop behind their house in Newi. Alongside a single folded page she had read so many times as a girl that she had stopped noticing what it actually said. Her goal that year was not complicated. She wanted her mother off the dialysis waiting list at Nnamdi Azikiwe University Teaching Hospital and onto a transplant list, which required 800,000 naira she did not have. She wanted her younger brother, Ikenna, 17, to finish his wake exams in May without withdrawing to take a factory job in Onitsha, the way 2 of his classmates already had that term. She did not want, particularly, to marry into wealth, and she told Tobena so the first time he proposed, in the staff kitchen at 6:15 a.m., before either of them had eaten, which is precisely why he asked her again 3 more times before she said yes. It had started, if it started anywhere in particular, on a Tuesday in November of 2024, when Tobena came down to the kitchen at midnight with a fever of 38.9 degrees and found Chidinma the only person still awake, and instead of ringing for staff the way the house was built for him to do, he sat at the small steel table where the domestic workers ate their meals and let her press a cold cloth to his forehead while she finished the household ledger. Neither of them saying very much, because there was not yet very much that needed saying. He noticed, that night, that she balanced the week's accounts to the naira without a calculator. She noticed that he had said thank you twice, out loud, for a glass of water, something none of the cousins who had grown up in that house had ever once done. The dignity she carried was quiet. She curtsied to guests who did not look up from their phones to acknowledge it, because the curtsy was for her own posture, not their attention. She smelled faintly of the lemongrass soap the staff bought in bulk from a wholesaler in Aja, a smell that clung to her uniform no matter how many times it went through the wash, And she kept her 2 work uniforms ironed with a precision the other girls teased her about, folding the collars under exactly the way her mother had shown her before she left Neui at 19. When the head housekeeper accused her once, wrongly, of breaking a vase, Chidinma did not raise her voice. She explained where she had been at the time, named the 2 people who could confirm it, and waited, arms at her sides, until the housekeeper found the vase had simply been moved by the gardener. She had been keeping the household's weekly grocery accounts since her 2nd month at the estate, a task no one had assigned her, and that she had simply begun doing after noticing the figures did not add up, in handwriting nearly identical to the cramped, careful columns in her father's old notebook. A notebook she kept in a plastic bag inside her pillowcase, the way some women keep money. Mr. Gerald Okonji had managed the Adeyemi Bright estate for 19 years, and he had a policy, stated plainly to every new member of staff during orientation, that domestic employees did not fraternize with family members under any circumstance. It was not written into any contract. It did not need to be. When he noticed, in February of 2025, that Tobena had begun taking his coffee in the kitchen instead of the breakfast room, he reported it to Chief Obinna Adeyemi Bright within the week, the way a man reports a fire before it reaches the curtains. Chief Obinna had built Bright Crown Foods from a single Gary processing line in 1998 into a company with 14 factories and a listing on the Nigerian exchange. And he ran his household the way he ran his board, by deciding things in advance and informing people afterward. He did not shout when Gerald told him. He set down his pen, asked one question, "What is her surname?" And when Gerald answered, something in his face went still in a way Gerald had never seen before, though Gerald, not knowing what the stillness meant, mistook it for ordinary disapproval and said nothing more about it. 3 weeks later, Chief Obinna informed his son, in 4 sentences, that the relationship would end. Tobena, 29 years old and already serving as the company's chief operating officer, told his father in 3 that it would not. The wedding took place at the Ikoyi Registry on the 28th of September, with 11 guests, and the reception 6 days later was Tobena's decision alone, thrown without his father's name on a single invitation, and attended, in the end, by Chief Obinna anyway, standing at the edge of the lawn near the gate the whole evening, speaking to almost no one, watching. 300 guests had eaten jollof rice and pepper soup and danced to a live band for 4 hours by the time the police arrived, and not one of them, in the minutes after the handcuffs closed, moved to ask the officers a single question. A senator's wife near the cake table continued scrolling her phone through the entire exchange, and later told a society columnist she had sensed something was off about the girl from the beginning. The band's vocalist, mid-lyric when the officers entered, finished the verse before stopping. It was the most ordinary kind of cruelty, not 300 people deciding to do nothing, but 300 people each individually deciding it was someone else's place to do something. By 11:55 p.m., 9 minutes after the cuffs closed, Chidinma was in the back of a police vehicle, still wearing the altered satin gown, traveling the 11 minutes to the Lekki Police Division with an officer reading her, in a flat procedural voice, an allegation of theft involving a diamond necklace valued at the equivalent of 9 million naira, last seen, according to the report, in Chief Obinna Adeyemi Bright's private safe before it was discovered, that same evening, sewn into the lining of Chidinma's overnight bag. The holding cell at Lekki Division had one fluorescent tube that buzzed at a pitch just below hearing and one window, barred, facing a generator that ran from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. every night that month due to the area's power schedule. The concrete bench was cold enough that Chidinma could feel it through the satin of the gown within minutes, and the air carried the smell of diesel exhaust and the disinfectant someone had mopped the corridor with hours earlier, gone sharp and stale. Chidinma sat without speaking for the first 4 hours, her wrists still faintly marked from the cuffs, the satin gown gathering dust along the hem, doing the only things she knew how to do with her hands when there was nothing else to do with them, running through the household's grocery figures from memory, column by column. Because counting something, anything, kept the rest of her still. A magistrate's clerk had informed the desk officer at 9 p.m. that the earliest a bail hearing could be scheduled was the following afternoon, since the assigned magistrate was traveling and her substitute did not sit on Saturdays. That gave the case 19 hours before anyone with the authority to release her would even look at the file. It was a duty sergeant named Patience Akebe, no relation to anyone in this story that Chidinma knew of, who brought her a plastic cup of tea at 2 a.m. Without being asked, and allowed her, against the desk officer's preference, one phone call, which went 14 times to Tabena's number and reached 14 times only his voicemail, because his flight from Houston had been delayed on the tarmac for 6 hours and his phone had been off since 9 p.m. Lagos time. Sergeant Ashebe did not say anything about the case itself. She only said, the second time she came past with more tea at 4 a.m., drink it while it is hot. Cold tea does nothing for anybody. It was during the inventory of her confiscated belongings, logged item by item at 3:40 a.m., by a different officer, that the green notebook came up. He turned it over once, read the embossed name on the inside cover, asked her, not unkindly, who Engineer Inuosu was, and when she said my father, wrote personal effects, one notebook on the log, and moved to the next item without further comment. Neither of them thought anything more of it that night. If this story is sitting somewhere in your chest the way it sat in mine, stay with me, because the part of this story that actually matters has not started yet. A pro bono lawyer from a legal aid clinic on Awolowo Road secured Chidinma's release on interim bail at 6:20 p.m. The following day, after 30 hours in custody, on the grounds that the necklace's chain of custody had not been properly documented before it was logged as evidence. Tabena landed at Murtala Muhammad International Airport at 4:10 a.m., learned what had happened from a text message his cousin sent him while he was still on the tarmac, and was at the police station by 5:55 a.m., 15 minutes too early to do anything but wait. He sat on a plastic chair in the station's outer hallway for nearly 13 hours, refusing the offer of a private office from an inspector who recognized his surname, declining food twice, standing every time a door opened anywhere in the building. When the duty sergeant finally told him the bail paperwork was being processed, he did not say anything for a moment. He simply pressed both hands flat against his knees, the same gesture, though neither of them would ever know it. His wife had made 9 months earlier the first time she had told him about her father. For 11 hours it looked, briefly, like the worst of it was over. It was not. By Wednesday morning, Chief Obina's lawyers had filed an emergency petition at the Lagos State High Court in Ikoyi, seeking to annul the marriage on the grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation of background, with a hearing scheduled for the following Monday, 4 days away. That same afternoon, Mr. Gerald Okonji drove the 8 hours to Noe, arriving at 4:50 p.m. at the small provisions shop Chidinma's mother, Ngozi, ran beside the family compound on a dirt road 2 streets back from the main Noe-Onitsha road. The shop sold soap, matches, tinned tomatoes, and groundnut oil decanted into used bottles, and it had stood on that plot for 19 years, on a lease held informally through a family friend of Chief Obina's. An arrangement Ngozi had never thought to question, because in 19 years, no one had ever given her a reason to. Gerald stood just inside the doorway, declining the stool Ngozi offered him, and explained, in the careful language of a man delivering someone else's threat without using the word, that certain arrangements regarding the shop's land lease might need to be reviewed depending on how matters in Lagos were resolved in the coming week. Ngozi did not argue with him. She thanked him for coming all that way to tell her. The way her daughter had been taught to thank people for things that cost her something, and she did not sit back down on her own stool until his car had pulled fully out of sight. It was Mr. Kingsley Akebe, no relation to Sergeant Patience Akebe. A coincidence Chidinma would only learn to find funny much later, who arrived at the shop in Nui 2 hours after Gerald left, having read a 3-paragraph item in a Lagos tabloid about a billionaire's son's bride arrested at her own wedding, and having stopped on the surname the way a man stops on a name he has carried for 11 years, without saying it aloud. Mr. Akebe had been the chief accountant at Bright Crown Foods from 1997 to 2009, before he retired to a small bungalow in Newi. And he asked Chidinma's mother one question before anything else, standing in the same doorway Gerald had stood in 2 hours earlier: whether her late husband had kept a copy of the partnership agreement he signed with a young trader named Obinna Adeyemi in March of 1998. He had. It was the folded page inside the green notebook, the one Chidinma had read so many times as a girl that she had stopped seeing it. A single handwritten page, witnessed and signed by both men, granting engineer Emmanuel Nwosu a 51% ownership stake in any commercial process built from his fermentation formula, in exchange for the 80,000 naira in starting capital Obinna had provided. Mr. Akebe sat down on the stool Gerald had refused, accepted a cup of water, and explained what Chidinma's mother already half knew and had never had the money or the standing to pursue. Within a year of the agreement, he said, Obinna had registered the process under his own name alone, filing the patent through a Lagos solicitor while Emmanuel was still building out the second fermentation tank in his workshop. Emmanuel's workshop had burned down in an electrical fire in March of 1999, with most of his loose records inside it, though the notebook had survived because Emmanuel kept it, as a habit, in a tin trunk at the house rather than the workshop. The doctor's report, 4 months later, listed the cause of Emmanuel's death as cardiac arrest brought on, the file noted without elaboration, by prolonged stress. Mr. Achebe had raised the matter once, quietly, with Obinna in 2001, and had been told, just as quietly, that there was no document, no witness, and no case, and that his own position at the company might be reviewed if he raised it again. He had not raised it again. He had carried it instead, the way a man carries the one decision in his working life he is least proud of, for 24 years, until a 3-paragraph tabloid item put a surname in front of him that he recognized before he had finished the second sentence. "I am sorry it took a newspaper," he told Ngozi, "to bring me back to this door." Ngozi set the green notebook down on the wooden table between them and opened it to the page she had told her daughter for 11 years was simply your father's old papers. What Mr. Achebe held in his hands that evening was not just proof of a debt 11 years old. It was a document that, properly filed, would determine who actually owned 51% of one of Nigeria's largest food companies. But what it would take to make that document matter, against a man with 14 factories and a legal team on retainer, Chidinma would not fully understand until the following Monday, standing outside a courtroom in Ikoyi, with 4 days having become 4 hours. The courtroom on Monday filled by 8:40 a.m. Chief Obinna's legal team at one table, Tobena and a borrowed lawyer at the other, Chidinma seated behind them in a plain blue dress she had ironed herself that morning out of habit. A handful of reporters who had picked up the tabloid story sat in the back row with notebooks of their own, none of them yet aware of what was inside the folder Lady Augustina's driver was carrying. Chief Obinna did not look at his son. At 9:02 a.m., before the judge had taken the bench, a side door opened and Lady Augustina Adeyemi Bright entered the room. She was 83 years old, walked without assistance, and had not appeared in public in connection with Bright Crown Foods in over a decade, having handed day-to-day control to her son in 2010 while retaining, through the original family trust she had founded in 1979, selling smoked fish from a single table in Mile 12 Market. 22% of the company's voting shares, a fact most people in the room, including several of Chief Obinna's own lawyers, had genuinely forgotten. Chief Obinna's legal team stood up when she entered. The court clerk, recognizing her from a photograph in the company's old annual reports, stood up a half-second later than everyone else and stayed standing a half-second too long. Chief Obinna himself did not move for nearly 4 seconds, and when he did, it was only to push his chair back and rise, slowly, the way a man rises for someone he has not stood for in 15 years. She crossed the room, set a single folder on the table in front of the judge's bench, and said 5 words to her son before the bailiff had finished calling the room to order. "Sit down, Obinna. I'll speak." Chief Obinna's hand, which had been reaching for a stack of papers, stopped in the air and came back down empty. He sat. Lady Augustina did not raise her voice for the 11 minutes she addressed the court. She confirmed, as founding trustee, that she had reviewed the document Mr. Achebe had couriered to her 3 days earlier, that she recognized her late husband's company's seal on its corner, used, she noted, by exactly one signatory in 1998, and that the trust would be requesting an independent forensic audit of Bright Crown Foods' original 1998 incorporation filings before any further proceedings, marital or otherwise, were heard by the court. The petition for annulment, she stated, would be withdrawn that morning, with the trust's full backing, or the trust would itself file separately to contest the legitimacy of the company's ownership structure. Chief Obinna's lawyers withdrew the petition before lunch. What followed over the next 6 weeks was not punishment. It was an audit, then a settlement, then a restructuring. An independent forensic accounting firm out of Lagos confirmed, by the second week, that the 1998 patent filing for the fermentation process bore a registration date 11 months after the handwritten agreement Mr. Achebe had couriered to the trust, a gap the firm's report described, in language considerably gentler than the facts deserved, as inconsistent with standard incorporation practice. 51% of Bright Crown Foods' original fermentation patent line was transferred, by binding agreement, into a trust in the name of engineer Emmanuel Nwosu, administered jointly by his widow and his daughter, with Chidinma named to the company's board not as a courtesy, but as a controlling shareholder of the division that had built the company in the first place. Chief Obinna remained chairman in title, but the trust's restructured bylaws required, going forward, that any decision concerning the fermentation division pass through a vote in which his mother's 22% and his daughter-in-law's new 51% could, between them, overrule him entirely, which they did not need to do twice before he stopped attending the division's quarterly meetings at all. A new wing at Nnamdi Azikiwe University Teaching Hospital's renal unit opened the following March, funded entirely by the trust, with no plaque bearing the Adeyemi Bright name on it, only a smaller one, near the entrance, that read simply, "In memory of engineer E. Nwosu, who built something nobody could take from his family, even after they tried." Ekena sat his wake exams that May from a desk in a private secondary school in Aka, and did not need to consider the factory job again. Chief Obinna thought, in March of 1998, that he was simply a young trader, doing what young traders did, taking the larger share of a deal made with a man who had no lawyer in the room to stop him. But what Emmanuel Nwosu actually left his daughter was never the 80,000 naira he never recovered. and it was never even the patent itself. It was a notebook, kept whole through 15 moves and one funeral and a marriage and an arrest. That one man's signature could not erase, no matter how many factories he built on top of it. You can burn a workshop, you can register a formula under a name that is not the name that built it. You can decide, in a boardroom, that a poor man's signature does not require honoring once he is no longer alive to demand it. But you cannot take the one thing a father leaves a daughter who learns to keep careful records, because he taught her to. Proof, written in his own hand, that someone once promised her something in good faith, witnessed, dated, and signed. That proof does not expire. It simply waits for someone to open the right notebook on the right evening. And on the evening the settlement was finalized, Kidinma sat on the back steps of the Noe shop, where her mother still insisted on working 3 days a week, the green notebook open on her knees to the page she had read 100 times before she ever understood what it meant, while her husband sat beside her saying nothing, the way a person sits beside someone when the silence has finally stopped meaning something was wrong. If someone in your family kept a promise written down, witnessed, and signed, that the world later decided to forget, would you know where to look for it? And if you found it, would you have the patience to wait for the right room to bring it into? Leave your answer below. I would like to read it. Subscribe if you want more stories about the records the world tries to erase and the people who keep them anyway. I will see you in the next one.